stop training students, we're going to lose the lead very quickly, he said. It's not clear anyone else is going to pick up the ball. We're just going to be worse off and people won't even be aware of it. It's hard to notice when it takes 20 years instead of 10 to get a cure. Cuts within the NIH are also adding to the rapidly constricting pool of places prospective scientists can go and train. Since the 1960s, the NIH has provided opportunities for recent college graduates to spend 1 or 2 years in a full-time research position within one of the Institute's labs, which many scientists see as a key tool for recruiting young people into biomedical fields. On February 1st, a notice appeared on the NIH website announcing that all training programs had paused recruitment, pending guidance from Health and Human Services. The NIH post-bac program, which provides recent college graduates with research positions in career advising, and last year admitted roughly 1,600 people, will not be accepting any new applicants for 2025, according to an NIH employee who asked for anonymity for fear, of course, that's my ad, of repercussions. It's a vital link in the training of doctors and biomedical scientists in the country. The NIH employee said, you can't find a medical school or a biomedical program that doesn't have students from the post-bac program. And it's ended. While the Trump administration may be hoping that the headwinds in creating for academic hiring may push recent graduates or newly minted PhDs into the private industry, it's unlikely to play out that way because of the speed and scale of the disruption. Pharmaceutical firms are not going to suddenly open up more jobs for graduates to adapt to this situation, said Ding. More likely is that people will start looking for opportunities outside the United States or wind up without jobs altogether. At this point, it's still too early to say if these are the first signs of losing a generation of scientists. But even people like Ding, who track the data that could provide clues about how extensive the damage will be, are facing uncertainty about their ability to continue their own work. Her plan to hire a postdoc are currently on hold as she waits to find out if a grant she has through the National Science Foundation, which is facing its own dramatic cuts, will come through. I mean, honestly, I'm here because I said at the beginning, some 9 hours ago, that I was going to stand here because what is going on in America is not normal. We've gone through healthcare cuts. We've gone through Social Security being attacked and undermined and slashed, Department of Education. But if those things don't worry you, statements like this should. It's still a little too early to say that these things are the first signs of losing a generation of American scientists. I know this. I've been privileged. I've studied at Oxford University overseas. I've studied at Stanford University in Silicon Valley, and I've studied at Yale. And watched friends get degrees in the sciences in things I couldn't spell. And they had options, not just in America, but the brightest minds on the planet Earth. There's a global competition going on for them. From Canada to Oxford to countries in Asia. If you're telling me thousands of people right now, 71 days into the Trump administration, are losing opportunities in the sciences to do research in the most important areas of human endeavor, can't get hired, they will go elsewhere. For over a generation, America has led the planet Earth because of this combination between research universities, private sector industry, and government. How do I know this? Because I'm here because of it. The whole computer revolution in America was because incredible computer science researchers at academic institutions were partnering with industry and being funded in many ways by the government, and it helped companies like IBM with their mainframes dominate. My dad was one of IBM's first black people hired as a salesman in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. My parents were IBMers. Because when scientific endeavor explodes into new industry, new ideas, new biomedical breakthroughs, it creates a ripple effect through our economy, lifting so many people up. And in 71 days, Donald Trump's actions have led scientific articles like this to talk about a postdoc program which provides bright, recent college graduates, brilliant people, 1,600 of them, to usually get jobs, has been canceled. And this article laments from scientists, not political people, not politicians, that this is a crisis. It's a crisis in America. And we haven't held one hearing on this in Congress. Yet, university after university, I can't be the only senator having this happen. Not just from my state, the universities are coming, from New York to California, sounding the alarm that we are going to lose our competitive edge against one of our greatest competitors, China, who is doubling down, as the article said, in research on the sciences. But let me just give you some examples, and then I'll yield for a question. I just want to talk about some New Jersey institutions that have written me out. Rutgers has been a partner in the Air Force Research Laboratory's Minority Leaders Research Collaborative Program. That grant, which has been led by the Ohio State University, is on pause. God forbid they use the word minority, and the annual program review and summer internship programs are not expected to happen this year. Rutgers School of Nursing has been working with the Institute of Human Virology in Nigeria on an action to sustain precision and integrated HIV response towards epidemic control, and they were funded through a CDC and PEPFAR grant. A stop work order came in. Multiple Rutgers entities have received communications from federal agencies related to DEIA cancellation of apprenticeship programs. Many conferences have been canceled that are trying to find the best minds wherever they might be, because there's many geniuses at Howard and Fisk and Morehouse that are often overlooked. Anika Barber, faculty of the Rutgers Department of Molecular Biology and Biochemistry, writes me this: Rutgers holds an NIH initiative for maximizing student development training grant that supports an additional 5 doctoral students. This grant expires in January 2026, and we put in for a renewal this fall, for which I wrote a letter of support. However, it seems likely that this grant proposal will not even be reviewed. I just completed the first year of funding on my NIH Maximizing Investigations Research Award and put in my progress report for the next years of funding. These are non-competing renewals, which means they don't go through peer review. In the past, they were reviewed by the NIH program officials to ensure that the funds are being managed in accordance with the approval grant and the research findings. However, NIH has been extremely slow to process even these non-competitive renewals. This type of grant requires a plan for enhancing the work. I want to read this last letter. It's handwritten. I am writing you not only as a concerned parent who believes in progress, education, and the power of science to improve lives. My daughter is a PhD in neuroscience, dedicating her life to research that has the potential to save countless lives. As a minority in science, she has worked tirelessly to overcome barriers in a field that is already competitive and demanding. Watching the current political attacks on research funding is devastating, not just for her future, but for the future of the American country. Science is not political. It serves all people. Yet funding cuts to agencies like NIH and the National Science Foundation threaten to halt critical research that leads to medical breakthroughs. These cuts will not only slow progress in fighting diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, but they will also discourage young, diverse scientists, many of whom have already fought hard to be in these spaces, from staying in the field. This is not just about scientists. It's about every American. Diseases do not know political parties. Without adequate research funding, we are all at risk of losing the chance for better treatments, new cures, and improved health care. If we truly want a stronger and more innovative America, we must invest in science, not abandon it. Defunding research will also harm our economy. Scientific innovation drives job creation, medical advancements, and global progress. A country that does not invest in science is a country that falls behind. I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I thank the senator. What the senator is outlining is an extraordinary assault, not just on education, but on the knowledge economy. I want to bring manufacturing jobs back to this country, but I understand, I think everybody understands, that we are not going to be a nation filled with low-skill manufacturing jobs. We are going to be a nation that does high-skill manufacturing. We are going to be a nation that invents things. We are going to be a nation that is dependent on engineering and on invention. We're going to be a knowledge economy. We are today, but we're going to be even more reliant on maintaining and expanding our knowledge edge on the rest of the world, given the fact that the pace of change and the oncoming transformation that will come from robotics and AI will make it even more important for a nation to have the most highly skilled, most highly educated workforce possible in order to stay ahead of the curve and not have employment be buried by automation and artificial intelligence. So this is a moment in which we should be doubling down on our support for the knowledge economy, on that integration of public sector research and private sector research, which has always been the genius of the American economy. We did that integration better than anybody, and it is not coincidental that we leapfrogged the rest of the world when it came to that innovation economy. But what the senator is explaining is that the Trump administration is waging a war on the knowledge economy, is literally signing our economic death warrant by coming after the foundational strength of our nation, which is that public-private sector integration. I just checked in with the University of Connecticut, which is going to lose $165 million because of this illegal change that the Trump administration has implemented, dramatically cutting the amount of research dollars that go to institutions with NIH grants. I'll just read like half their list. They gave me the list of all the research projects that are going to either be eliminated or slowed or diminished. A project for improving physical and cognitive function in aging, a project on improving outcomes for people with autism, a problem on understanding neural mechanisms for language and reading, including for people with dyslexia, funding for prevention and care for HIV patients, projects for studying the leading causes of death and disability in the United States, including cancer, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, and substance abuse, project studying treatments for rare diseases and genetic disorders with specific impacts on health, including sickle cell, mitochondrial disorders, Rett syndrome and Prader-Willi syndrome, muscle and bone regeneration research, tick-borne diseases, University of Connecticut faces the same crisis as all the other institutions listed in that incredibly long and comprehensive Stat News article. And as you mentioned, researchers are not going to wait around for this crisis to pass. They are going to accept offers from research institutions in other countries, from our European allies to our Asian competitors. We are going to lose our competitive edge when it comes to research. It is worth noting that this change in research funding is illegal. Article 1 vests the spending power of the federal government in Congress. That's plain and simple, and there's lots of good reasons why our founding fathers did that, Senator Booker. They were determined to keep the spending power out of the hands of the executive branch because they had seen how the British king had used the Treasury in order to compel loyalty and to punish opposition. You get money if you're loyal to me. I withhold money from you if you are disloyal to me. And so Congress got the spending power. We decided the exact rate of reimbursement for medical research. We were very specific about it in the statute that we passed, Republicans and Democrats. This cut in funding for institutes of higher education's research that has been implemented by the administration is illegal on its face. Congress said exactly how research funding should be allocated. The president is ignoring that statute and implementing a unilateral cut. It has been enjoined by the federal court. Hopefully, if the courts follow the law, it will be permanently stopped. But it is important to note that it stands in a larger context of the federal government using its spending power, the Trump administration trying to seize control of federal spending in order to do that work that our founding fathers were so worried about. We have seen over the past several weeks the administration march through school after school, trying to cut individual deals with institutions of higher education. We will release your funding only after you sign a bilateral agreement with the administration, lining your institute of higher education's priorities up with the political interests of the administration. This is exactly what our founding fathers were trying to avoid. The executive using the spending power to compel loyalty from individuals and institutions. What they are doing is illegal. And it is beyond me why my Republican colleagues, our Republican colleagues, stand idly by. Well, the spending power vested in Congress by the Constitution is ripped from us. But Senator Booker, I guess I'm going to ask you the same question I did when it came to this assault on Social Security. And it's a simple question, and I'll lay out a little bit of a predicate. The question is why? What the administration has done is extraordinary, proposing to close the Department of Education. Wildly unpopular. Nobody's asking for that. Waging this illegal and unconstitutional assault on our knowledge economy. Suspending funding for institutions of higher education research budgets when plainly the statute says they cannot do that. So why engage in this extraordinary action to essentially destroy America's knowledge economy from elementary school all the way up to graduate education? Well, as we've talked about, as you laid out, it can't be because you're trying to help the economy. This destroys the economy. I mean, this is the worst thing that you could probably do for the economy, is to wage this open, transparent, proudful assault on research. Because we will not survive as an economy unless we are the place where cutting-edge research and invention happens. We just won't. And so researchers now who are having all of their offers suspended by major colleges and universities, they're looking elsewhere. Maybe they're hoping that the offer still comes through, but they're dialing up other competitors, many of them outside of the United States. There was a story out of the University of Cambridge in England a couple weeks ago in which their administrators were talking about the bounty that they are receiving as some of the highest class researchers in the world are coming to them because they don't believe that they will have any source of stable funding from the United States. So it can't be about helping us create jobs or supporting our economy. This is no doubt an assault on the economy. One of the complaints that I hear often about elementary and secondary education is that the Department of Education was engaged in micromanagement, right? That it was a federal school board, and we want to get the federal government out of the business of dictating what local schools will do. Well, that's not a credible explanation for what's happening, because in fact, the Trump administration is telegraphing that they are going to actually jump into the micromanagement of our local schools. Nobody has any idea what DEI means. Like, let's just be honest. It means something different to every single official in the Trump administration. It's just a proxy to impose a set of reactionary right-wing values on our schools or on our federal agencies. I asked a question of the nominee to be the alleged last Secretary of Education as to whether or not African American history could be taught in our high schools any longer. And her answer was essentially, maybe not. I don't know, but DEI might mean that you can't teach African American history. It might mean that the federal government is going to comb through every syllabus in every high school in the entire country and tell you what courses you can teach and what courses you can't. And if there's any words in there that our AI algorithm doesn't like African, can't teach it. That's a level of micromanagement never seen before in the federal government. And so the reason that they are cracking down on the Department of Education or eliminating funding for research is not because they are trying to get the federal government out of the management of our schools, because they're doing exactly the opposite. They're telling you that your school is not going to be able to make decisions on what classes it offers its students. It's going to be Linda McMahon, the former CEO of the World Wrestling Federation, that is going to be in charge of whether your school can teach African American history. Okay? So then what's the reason, Senator Booker? And I'll, just give you a couple suggestions. Well, maybe it's just to compel loyalty, right? Maybe it's just to use that money to compel loyalty so that boards of education or colleges are only teaching conservative or right-leaning curriculum. Maybe it's to try to quell protest on campuses so that there isn't an ability for students to robustly protest the policies of the regime. Maybe it's just to destroy the idea of objective truth. I mean, this whole scandal over Signal has lots of elements to it, but I think one of the most worrying things for the American public, why it's still a story a week later, is because the Secretary of Defense looked the American public in the eye and said 2 + 2 = 9. Right? He said, those Signal texts you saw did not involve war plans, did not involve classified information. And the American public was like, wait a second, we read them. I'm not dumb. I know those were war plans. I know that that was classified information. But if you are in the business of trying to unwind a democracy, you have to destroy objective truth. You have to make everything political. You have to make everything subjective. Where is objective truth midwifed? It's in our education system. That's where we learn that 2 + 2 = 4 every time. But if you want to undermine the foundation of a democracy, then you undermine the place where truth happens. Okay, maybe it's the same agenda with Social Security. Just come up with an excuse to privatize it all. Just take all the money that's going to good public sector research and just move it all into the private sector so it can be a source to reward the friends of President Trump. That could be a rationale as well. Or maybe it's even simpler. Maybe it's just to own the libs. Maybe it's just that historically, Democrats and the left have maybe talked about education more than Republicans have, even though to me it was always something we both cared about. Whether or not I agreed with George Bush's No Child Left Behind plan, at least he was walking into the Capitol with a plan to try to improve education. But maybe it's just that, you know, Democrats and the left have historically talked more about education, and if you believe, as Donald Trump does, that all politics is zero-sum, anything that Democrats are for must be, by definition, bad for America. And Democrats seem to like college, and they seem to really support our schools, so we have to destroy our colleges, and we have to destroy public education, because if the left is for it, it must be evil. Maybe that's the reason they're doing it. But that's the question I pose to you, because it has nothing to do with our economy. It has nothing to do with getting the federal government out of the management of schools and colleges. There's another agenda here, and it doesn't seem to be an agenda that squares with anything the American people have been asking, Senator Booker.
I just want to answer you. I would drive myself mad trying to understand what the ambitions of Trump was, or the ambitions behind some of the crazy stuff in Project 2025 that he said wasn't there. They tried to run away from it because it was so unpopular, and now so much of it is being done. It almost sounds like too partisan, too insane. What I do want to do, Senator Murphy, in answer to your question, all I can do is try to be as fair and factual in describing what's happening in our country and appeal to people who are moderates in this country, the people who are fair arbiters of what's happening, to try to appeal to them that this is a crisis. So when university after university after university is cutting scientific research, stopping bringing in the best minds, PhD candidates, postdocs, when they're telling you that they're stopping investment in state-of-the-art research buildings, when they're telling you that they're shutting down programs to bring the youngest, brightest minds in, and our competitor, China, is doing the exact opposite, flowing money through, because China understands if we get 2 steps ahead of America on quantum computing, we can break all kinds of encryptions. We can locate every submarine they have. China understands if we can get 2 steps ahead of America on artificial intelligence, it's an end game for them. This is a global competition, and a president in 71 days, if you are a moderate in America and just want America to win in human endeavor, look at what the president is doing. And here's to the point you were driving, Senator Murphy. It is Orwellian. The bastions of freedom that are our universities, as the article from Fareed Zakaria has said, even with universities that got too woke and had too excesses, the antidote to that isn't to try to shut down the thought of the left, it's to try to make a fair, more competitive marketplace for ideas from all around the political spectrum. But this isn't about politics, it's about science, it's about research, it's about cutting NIH funding, science funding. But I want to stick with that because that's the controversial nub, right? Like, we need to go after DEI programs. I'm hearing it all the time. It was like the confusion I had 5 years ago when people were asking me, oh, the Republicans are talking about critical race theory. I have, as my father says, I got more degrees in the month of July, but I'm not hot. But I had to go back and research what is critical race theory. Oxford, Stanford, Yale graduate, I didn't sure what they were talking about. And this is the rub on that, because I don't want to just talk about what's obvious, which should enrage people on both sides of the aisle. Not just enrage people on both sides of the aisle because of the China outcompeting us, but because we allocated this money in a bipartisan way that he's now trying to pull back. That should enrage us as a violation of Article 1 of the Constitution. But I want to stick in this more controversial era that you talked about, that has all across the country people banning books. When I heard Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye was being taken out of libraries, when I heard my favorite author, James Baldwin, was being taken out of libraries, what kind of world do we live in? We're somehow studying what they call Black history is something that we have to, that Trump feels like he's to rally people to stop, where a person going for the Department of Education can't look you in the eye and says, yes, we need to study Black history. Well, I get upset with that because Black history is American history. I had a brilliant friend of mine, brilliant, look with me in deadpan embarrassment and tell me he just found out that year about the bombing in Tulsa, Oklahoma, something I worked with Senator Lankford to do more to memorialize, but just never knew about it. That this thriving African-American financial community was the first recorded aerial bombing, not Pearl Harbor, in the United States of America, and he was never taught it. Is that Black history or is that American history? Why do these people who attack our history think they have to sanitize, homogenize American, Disneyify American history to make us proud? I am more proud of our country when we tell the truth about what happened, when we learn from the wretchedness and the difficulties and the bigotries and the hates and the demagogues who pit us against each other and how we all overcame that. That's our greatness. How the genius of inventors that were women or blacks in the most oppressive of times still manifested their genius that transformed humanities. These are stories that should make every American more proud. So yeah, when you have a president now that is making people scrape through programs that they don't even know what they're doing, but if they have the word diversity in it, that's bad? That's insanity. My mom worked for IBM before they used words like DEI, and one of her jobs was to find a bigger pool of highly qualified applicants. And so you know what she did is what is being stopped by the Trump administration? She just made sure that they were going to HBCUs to find the brightest students so that their applicant pool would be better. This isn't about preferential treatment for one group over another. It's about trying to create a more competitive pool where we get the best of the best. It's about merit-based. And this president talks about merit, and I watched Senator Whitehouse ask one of the top lawyers in the EPA if he'd ever brought a case, if he had ever had a hearing, if he ever did a deposition. No. And he's like, wait a minute, how are you qualified for this job? And that's the conflict in the logic that I'm observing. In one sense, they're exalting the wealthy elites. I have never imagined that I would see a presidential inauguration where billionaires, leaders of tech companies would sit in front of cabinet members, many of whom were billionaires themselves, but that kind of elitism, but yet they call academic excellence, brilliance and achievement in the sciences at these universities the elites that we need to go after. If we start going after our educational institutions and weakening their ability to advance excellence in human endeavor, we are injuring ourselves, and we have models for that. As Fareed Zakaria says, the best model is Mao Zedong and the Cultural Revolutions, where one of the first groups they went after were their universities. But now they're reversing that. And they watched what we did so well that they're doubling down on their funding of universities. They're taking their best scientists and taking away their passports because they don't want them to come here and study. because they're trying to get ahead of us with DeepSeek and AI. They're trying to get ahead of us in quantum computing. They're trying to get ahead of us in robotics. They're trying to get ahead of us in biomedical engineering. They're trying to get ahead of us in all of these things, and they know the way they do it is to do what America did in the 60s, the 70s, 80s, the 90s, the aughts, the 2010s, to do what they did in all those times, and look at them now. Look at them now. I will yield while still retaining the floor.
I take the gentleman's point, my friend's point, right? I am probing tonight for the why, right? Because it's the obvious question. It doesn't make sense, right? On its face, this intentional chaos in Social Security, in Medicare, in higher education, it doesn't make sense. It's not about efficiency. It's not about jobs. So what is it about? But your point is a good one. That may not actually be the conversation that a lot of apolitical Americans are asking. They may just be looking at this on the face and say, how does it impact me? Doesn't matter to me why it's happening. It just matters to me how it's going to impact me. And there's just no doubt that this assault on higher education has an impact. It does. Because we are, as you've said it better than I have, we are just in a race.
Yes.
We are just in a race, and we just decided to slow down to a walk, which is a shame because we're fast. You know, we're fast. This country is quick, and our coach just told us, start walking while the other guys speed up. And, you know, this is why we have urgency, because the race is, this one's not I mean, you know, maybe it's a marathon, but, you know, it's one of those races where if the other team gets too big a lead, it's going to be hard to catch up. And so in the next 3.5 years, if we just stand down in terms of supporting the knowledge economy, we're going to shed millions of jobs. And once those centers of excellence, research excellence, are outside of the United States, it's not like the next president can just come back in and fix it. That becomes a permanent liability for us. So the reason that I'm here on the floor with you, Senator Booker, is because I agree with you that this is not normal, but I also agree with you that we got to wake our colleagues up fast, because like a second ago, I thought we all agreed on the fact that we need to support the knowledge economy. Like 2 seconds ago, we were all raising hands together, Republicans and Democrats, that we finally started putting big new dollars into NIH. We did a $2 billion increase, I think, a few years ago, and it was a big bipartisan achievement. And all of a sudden, just because Donald Trump is in the White House, we've lost the bipartisan consensus around supporting the knowledge economy.
And you go back to your question. I know you want to get your last question out before I jump into the next area that's so related to this, immigration. I mean, the brightest minds on the planet Earth that are coming here now are terrified to come here, but we'll talk about that.
I've made my point.
Oh, you made your point. I just wanted to say something to you because you just got me triggered when you said we had some consensus over the last 4 years that we were here. I love how you said just yesterday. I remember the CHIPS and Science Act. That was a bipartisan bill. I was sitting in a skiff with all of us, and I watched our whole national security apparatus talk about why science endeavors in chip making and the breakthroughs that are happening on chips are so essential for our national security, and how we had to stay ahead of the competition. And we marched out of that meeting in a bipartisan fashion. We saw this in the bipartisan work we've been doing on AI here, talking about how America has to lead in this area. And with all of that bipartisan vigor, we let a president come in 71 days and halt scientific research, pausing literally experiments in their tracks, halting researchers in their tracks, shaking universities to the core that are afraid of free expression for getting on the wrong side of dear leader, that it might cost them their science funding. So you are putting your finger on it. But can I just say something on a personal level? Because I just want to remind folks, as we close in on the 10th hour, that you and I were here for 15, and you are here. You are here because you agree with me. You agree with me that from science and research to higher education, to the Department of Education, to Social Security, to healthcare in America, we are at a crisis. Any one of those alone should have Americans. But the case we're making going through all these, pulling from people on the left and the right. We've quoted Republican governors, we've quoted Republican mayor organizations, represented by organizations, we've quoted Republican business people, we've quoted for the Wall Street Journal, the Cato Institute's coming up. This is not a partisan crisis that people across the spectrum are pointing to. But I do want to point out that you've been such a good friend to me to spend 10 hours almost on the floor, and it means a lot to me tonight. So thank you for that as I switch to healthcare. And I appreciate the sentiment that you have and that you had after the Pulse shooting, that you were so worried about when I listened to your maiden speech when you first got here to the Senate, that we would normalize gun violence in this country. And what I'm worried about, I share your worry there. I grew up in a time where fire drills were the big thing. In that space between people ducking and covering because of nuclear fears, and left school before we were a country that had more active shooter drills than fire drills. And we just sort of are normalizing this terror in our country and haven't stepped up to the challenge of really doing something about it. But this is one of these crises where if we act like business as usual, 71 days so far of the Trump administration, when we get to 100 days, catastrophic things could have happened to Medicaid and health care. The crashing of research for science, the attacks on the programs our senior citizens rely on. We as a country have to, as I said at the very beginning, 10 hours ago almost, we have to do what John Lewis challenged us to do, to stand up, to speak up, to get into good trouble, necessary trouble. And tonight, my friend, in the wee hours, so many songs about 4 a.m, it's like the hour that, that nobody should be awake, and I want to thank the presiding officer for being here. I want to thank the clerks and the parliamentary staff and the impositions. But the cries of American citizens for their leaders to do something different, to stand up, to speak up, I felt like this has to be done. And so let's keep going. Almost 10 hours in, I'm thankful, but we're going to start the next section. And like I'm trying to do in all of these is I'm trying to elevate the voices that don't get to come to this place, the voices that I'm hearing from, voices that identify themselves sometimes as I'm a Republican veteran, I'm a Democrat, but most of them are just people that are just saying, this is not normal. Many of them are saying, do something. Some of them who get me very emotional saying, what can I do? I get that question a lot. What can I do? Tell me what I can do to try to stop this. We're going to take this issue of immigration. And here is, I'm not sure where this person is from. My staff has covered it up probably to protect a person's identity. But I'm going to read this handwritten note. Oh, it's from New Jersey. Thank you. Senator Booker, please continue to fight the good fight against the injustices being done by the current administration. I am the pastor of Emmanuel Lutheran Church in New Brunswick. As a faith leader and your constituent, I am deeply concerned about the treatment of LGBTQ people and immigrants by this administration. The demonization and marginalization of these groups is unchristian and deeply offensive to the values of my faith. I ask that you continue to oppose all executive orders and legislation that targets these groups. You have been a consistent ally. Please continue to be a champion for justice for all people, but especially the most vulnerable. Another person. Late yesterday, in fact, court filings from the Trump administration revealed that they mistakenly deported a Maryland father with protected legal status to this horrific prison in El Salvador. Abrego Garcia is married to a United States citizen and has a 5-year-old disabled child who is a U.S. citizen. He has no criminal record in the United States, but despite receiving a legal status called withholding of removal, where a United States immigration judge found that it is more likely than not to face persecution if deported to El Salvador, the Trump administration deported him. Where? To the very country from which he fled gang violence. Here's the story that was written about him in The Atlantic. The Trump administration acknowledged in a court filing Monday that it had grabbed a Maryland father with protected legal status and mistakenly deported him to El Salvador, but said that the U.S. courts lack jurisdiction to order his return from the mega prison where he's now locked up. The case appears to be the first time the Trump administration has admitted to errors when it sent 3 plane loads of Salvadorians and Venezuelan deportees to El Salvador's grim terrorism confinement center on March 15th. Attorneys for several Venezuelan deportees have said that the Trump administration falsely labeled their clients as gang members because of their tattoos. But in Monday's court filing, attorneys for the government admitted that the Salvadorian man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, was deported accidentally. Although ICE was aware of his protection from removal to El Salvador, Abrego Garcia was removed to El Salvador because of an administrative error, the government told the court. Trump lawyers said the court has no ability to bring him back now that Abrego Garcia is in Salvadorian custody. Simon Sandoval Moshenberg, Abrego Garcia's attorney, said he's never seen a case in which the government knowingly deported someone who had already received protected legal status from an immigration judge. He is asking the court to order the Trump administration to ask for Abrego Garcia's return and, if necessary, to withhold payment to the Salvadorian government, which says it's charging the United States $6 million a year to jail U.S. deportees. The Trump administration told the court to dismiss the request on multiple grounds, including the Trump's primacy in foreign affairs. Primacy in foreign affairs. I'm not going to stop now, but I ask anybody who's read the Constitution to understand that the President of the United States is not king. He does not have primacy in foreign affairs. I continue with the article. The claim that the court is powerless to order any relief, Sandoval Moshenberg told me. If that's true, the immigration laws are meaningless, all of them, because the government can do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, and no court can do anything about it once it's done. Court filings show Abrego Garcia came to the United States at the age of 16 in 2011, fleeing gang threats in his native El Salvador. In 2019, he received a form of protected legal status known as withholding of removal from a U.S. immigration judge who found he would likely be targeted by gangs if he was deported back. Abrego Garcia, who is married to a U.S. citizen and has a 5-year-old disabled child who is also a U.S. citizen, has no criminal record in the United States, according to his attorney. The Trump administration does not claim he has a criminal record, but called him a danger to the community. They called him an active member of MS-13, the Salvadorian gang that Trump has declared a foreign terrorist organization. Sandoval Moshenberg said those charges are false, and the gang label stems from a 2019 incident when Abrego Garcia and 3 other men were detained in Home Depot parking lot by a police detective in Prince George's County Maryland. During questioning, one of the men told officers Abrego was a gang member, but the man offered no proof, and police say they didn't believe him. Filings show police did not identify him as a gang member. Alberto Garcia was not charged with the crime, but he was handed over to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement after the arrest to face deportation. In those proceedings, the government claimed that a reliable informant had identified him as a ranking member of MS-13. Abrego Garcia and his family hired an attorney and fought the government's attempt to deport him. He received withholding of removal 6 months later, that protective status. It's not a path to permanent U.S. residency, but it means the government won't deport him back to his home country because it's more likely than not that he'll face harm there. Abrego Garcia has no contact with any law enforcement agency since his release, according to its attorney. He works full-time as a union sheet metal apprentice, has complied with requirements to check in annually with ICE, and cares for his 5-year-old son who has autism and a hearing defect and is unable to communicate verbally. On March 12th, Abrego Garcia had picked up his son after work from the boy's grandmother's house when ICE officers stopped the car, saying his protective status had changed. Officers waited for Abrego's wife to come to the scene and take care of the boy, then drove away with him in handcuffs. Within 2 days, he had been transferred to an ICE staging facility in Texas, along with other detainees the government was preparing to send to El Salvador. Trump had invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, and the government planned to deport 2 plane loads of Venezuelans along with a separate group of Salvadorians. Abrego's family has no contact with him since he was sent to the mega prison in El Salvador known as the CECOT, C-E-C-O-T. His wife spotted her husband in the news photographs released by Salvadorian President Buckle on the morning of March 16th, after a U.S. district judge had told the Trump administration to halt the flights. Oopsie, Buckle wrote on social media, taunting the judge. Abrego Garcia's wife recognized her husband's decorative arm tattoo and scars, according to the court filing. The image showed Salvadorian guards in black ski masks frog marching him into the prison with his head down, shoved down toward the floor. The CECOT is the same prison Department of Homeland Security Kristi Noem visited last week, recording videos for social media while standing in front of a cell packed with silent detainees. If the government wants to deport someone with protective status, the standard course would be to reopen the case and introduce new evidence arguing for deportation. The deportation of a protective status holder has even stunned some government attorneys. I've been in touch with who are tracking the case, who declined to be named because they weren't authorized to speak to the press. One of those people texted me, what, period, the, period, expletive, period. Sandoval Moshenberg told the court he believes Trump officials deported his client through extrajudicial means because they believed that going through the immigration judge process took too long and they feared that they might not win after all their cases. Officials at ICE and the Department of Homeland Security did not respond to a question for comment. The Monday court filing by the government indicates officials knew Abrego Garcia had legal protections shielding him from deportation to El Salvador. ICE was aware of this grant, withholding the removal at a time of Abrego Garcia's removal from the United States. Reference was made to his status on internal forms. Abrego Garcia was not on the initial manifest of the deportation flight, but was listed as, in quotes, an alternate. The government attorneys explained, as other detainees were removed from the flight for various reasons, Abrego Garcia, in quotes, moved up the list. The flight manifest did not indicate that Abrego Garcia should not be removed. The attorney said through administrative error, Abrego Garcia was removed from the United States to El Salvador. This was an oversight, the government admitted. But despite this, they told the court that Abrego Garcia's deportation was carried out in good faith. I'm going to go into this section now, and I'm going to read things by conservative justices and liberal justices to some of the most conservative Supreme Court justices that say this is outrageous in this nation. No one. There are parts of this Constitution, and I'm going to talk about them, that talk about due process, about fundamental American ideals. But this story and the few others I've heard where Americans that have the status to stay here, that have an American spouse, American children, who will be traumatized by this. This case, a disabled child whose working father, who was struggling to take care of one of our children, an American child with an American mother. We were told that the president said he was going to be focusing on criminals, and these trumped up charges, where they admit in court they made a mistake, but write such mocking things to judges like whoopsie on social media, this cruelty, this is not who we are. So let's talk about the Constitution first. The Fifth and the 14th Amendment, the Fifth and the 14th Amendment. The Fifth and the 14th Amendments say that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. The central promise of those words is an assurance that all levels of the American government must operate within the law and the bonds of this Constitution, that everybody in this chamber swears an oath to uphold the Constitution. But every single day, it just seems our president is in challenging constitutional principles, pushing past constitutional boundaries. Every day we're hearing news stories of immigrants, some here legally, some awaiting trial, most charged with no crimes, being rounded up, detained, arrested, deported, often just disappeared. This is happening without charges, evidence, trials, hearings, without what the Constitution says, due process. This is what other governments done. We've talked about it. In the Foreign Relations Committee, we complain about it to nations across the earth when they do not show due process, where they disappear people. Maybe you're an immigrant that's never broken the law. Maybe you're a citizen. Even if you think the administration's immigration agenda doesn't apply to you, please know that the reckless behavior we're seeing erodes all of our rights. And the American mother and the American child right now, whose husband was unjustly and illegally deported and is right now in an El Salvadorian prison, think about them. Denying due process is a slippery slope. We've seen it in other countries with democratic backsliding. It is a slippery slope. If people can be detained and deported without a hearing, detained and deported without due process, without seeing a judge, nothing will stop from slipping towards deporting others, making mistakes with an American. I'm one of these people in this body that thinks our immigration system is in desperate need of reform. It was last updated 40 years ago. 40 years ago was the last time we acted to update our immigration laws. The failure to update our laws has resulted in our country's inability to manage unprecedented levels of global migration that are not just affecting our country, but are affecting others. It's an unprecedented influx of applications to enter the United States. It's put pressure and strain on our immigration system. It's slowed down processing times for millions of people trying to immigrate or naturalize legally and made it more difficult to incentivize the world's brightest minds to come here to contribute to our country's long-term success. For millions of Americans, immigration is not a political issue, it's a personal one. There are immigrants around my state and in every state who have waited year after year for Congress to find bipartisan agreement to improve our system in ways that most Americans agree on, whether you're right or left. They've been waiting for Congress to fix our outdated immigration laws, to secure our borders, to dedicate the resources necessary for USCIS to fix the outrageously long processing times for immigrations and provide a pathway to legal status for long-term American residents who have followed our laws, contributed to our societies, and some of them know no other country because they came here when they were just months old. Our immigration laws are so outdated, even the conservative Cato Institute published a comprehensive policy analysis in 2023 titled, "Why Legal Immigration is Nearly Impossible." In it, the Cato Institute explains, I quote, "Today, fewer than 1% of the people who want to move permanently to the United States can do so legally. Legal immigration is less like waiting in line and more like winning the lottery. It happens, but it's so rare that it's irrational to expect it in any individual case." The Cato Institute continues, "For some immigrants, this restrictive system sends them back into the black market of illegal immigration. For others, it sends them to other countries where they contribute to the quality of life in their homes. And for still others, it requires them to remain in their homeland, often underemployed, sometimes in danger. Whatever the outcome, the system punishes both prospective immigrants and Americans who would associate, contract, and trade with them. Congress and the administration can do better." I've met with conservatives, I've met with business groups, I've met with agricultural leaders who all talk to common sense things we should be doing to improve our immigration system, to protect our borders, yes, but to improve our economy, to improve our scientific research, to improve our quality of life. The only way to fix our broken immigration system is for Congress to fix it, to pass comprehensive immigration reform. But instead of a leader, strong leaders who go before Congress taking on the most complex issues, but yet have the courage to stand before Congress and pull them together to do hard things, instead of doing that, the last time we made progress in this body, President Trump actively blocked bipartisan legislation. Now he's imposed policies that aren't just going after criminals, they're dragging in so many others. When President Trump stopped Republicans from voting on the bipartisan bill that was negotiated in the Senate last year, he stopped us from making strides towards the larger fixes we need. The administration's immigration plans are not helping American citizens who are submitting applications so that their spouse or fiancé who is waiting in another country can finally join them in the United States. The administration right now is not helping American citizens who have been waiting for years for a visa for their brother or their sister or their mother or their father. Uniting families is an American value. Americans aren't getting any relief from these extraordinarily long wait times. On the USCIS website, you can check the average processing times for these cases, and most Americans would be shocked, or maybe even horrified, to learn just how long it will take for you as an American citizen to bring a husband or a wife or even a child back to the United States with you. We checked this past weekend, and here are the numbers. For the I-129 fiancé visa, the processing time for 80% of the cases is 8 months to 3 years. For an I-130 visa, if you're a U.S. citizen petitioning for your spouse, parent, or minor child, then the waiting time is any time from 17 months to 64 months. That's an average from anywhere from a year and a half to over 5 years. For an I-90, if your green card is destroyed in a flood or a fire, 80% of people will be waiting for almost a year and a half, 17 months, to just get a new copy. These numbers are shocking, and they don't even take into account long wait times for visa appointments at the US consulate or embassies. In India, for example, the average wait time for an appointment is well over 400 days. American citizens, including thousands of my constituents in New Jersey, are so angry. They're waiting far too long for their cases to be prioritized and adjudicated. But when Trump relocates all the resources within our immigration system to conducting the largest mass deportation of people in history, American citizens are paying the price, not just from USCIS processing times. We pay the price because to do this, he is diverting actual law enforcement resources away from solving crimes and stopping terrorism. His actions are actually making us less safe. We pay the price because these policies are eroding constitutional principles, as well as making us less safe by taking law enforcement away from their efforts. This plan is about conditioning Americans to the suspension of due process. First for immigrants. If we let due process erode for immigrants, it erodes for Americans. Let me outline a little bit about how this is happening and why this is a crisis. 2 weeks ago, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act. The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 allows the president to detain or deport the natives and citizens of an enemy nation that we are at war with. 1798 Act. The president can detain or deport these immigrants without a hearing, with no due process, even ones who are lawfully present in the United States. The Alien Enemies Act was last used during one of our country's darkest moments, the internment of Japanese, German, and Italian nationals during World War II. But even then, we still ensured that due process was followed. Prior to detention, people subjected to the Alien Enemies Act in the 1940s appeared before the Alien Enemy Hearing Board, where they could at least present evidence that they had no ties to Axis powers. As one circuit court judge recently said of Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act, there's no regulations, and nothing was adopted by agency officials that were administrating this. The people weren't even given notice. They weren't told where they were going. They were given these people on those planes, they were getting those people on the planes on Saturday and had no opportunity to file habeas or any type of action to challenge their removal. The standards of 1940 during World War II were higher than the standards of this president? The following are people that Trump has targeted and removed without criminal charges, without a hearing, without evidence, to a prison rife with human rights abuses in El Salvador. These are the people that he has sent there. A tattoo artist seeking asylum who entered the country legally, an aspiring pop musician with a tattoo of a hummingbird, a 24-year-old who used to teach swim classes for children with developmental disabilities and has a tattoo of an autism awareness ribbon in honor of his brother, a Venezuelan who had fled violence in Venezuela last year and came to the United States to seek asylum. His lawyer wrote on social media, ICE alleged that his tattoos are gang-related. They are absolutely not. Our client worked in the arts in Venezuela. He is gay. LGBTQ, his tattoos are benign. He has no criminal record. Another Venezuelan removed to this El Salvadorian prison is a barber with no criminal history. Another professional is a professional soccer player, has a tattoo with a soccer ball and a rosary closely resembling the logo of his favorite soccer team. This is stunning, what we're doing. These people were swept up and sent to another prison known for its human rights abuses because they were Venezuelan and had tattoos, benign tattoos. An article was published in one periodical about the anguish from families. Here are a few excerpts from the article. You are here because of your tattoos. The Trump administration sent Venezuelans to El Salvador's most infamous prison, their families are looking for answers. On Friday, March 14th, Arturo Suarez Trejo called his wife, Natalie Sanchez, from an immigration detention center in Texas. Suarez, a 33-year-old male, native of Caracas, Venezuela, explained that his deportation flight had been delayed. He told his wife he still would be home soon. Suarez did not go back to Venezuela. Still, there was at least a silver lining. In December, Sanchez had given birth to their daughter, Nahira. Suarez would finally have a chance to meet their 3-month-old baby girl he had never, ever seen. But Sanchez told the outlet she had not heard from Suarez since. Instead, last weekend, she found herself zooming in on a photo the government of El Salvador published of Venezuelan men the Trump administration had sent to President Nayib Bukele's infamous terrorism confinement center, or CCOT. I realized that one of them was my husband, she said. I recognized him by his tattoo, by his ear, and a scar on his chin. Even though I couldn't see his face, I knew it was him. The photo of Sanchez examined, a highly produced propaganda video promoted by Secretary of State and the White House, showed Venezuelans shackled in prison uniforms as they were pushed around by guards and had their heads shaved. The tattoo on Suarez's neck is of colibri, a hummingbird. His wife said it was meant to symbolize harmony and good energy. She said his other tattoos, like a palm tree on his hand and an homage to Suarez's late mother's use of Venezuelan expression about God being greater than a coconut tree, were similarly innocuous. Needless to say, they may be why Suarez has been effectively disappeared by the U.S. government into an El Salvadorian mega prison. We must keep our country safe. Violent criminals, people with long criminal records who are not citizens, I think every American would agree. They should be deported. Immigrants to this country surprisingly have a much lower rate of breaking laws, but if they break laws, I agree. But maybe you're an immigrant that's never broken a law. Maybe you're a naturalized citizen. Maybe you were born here. The problem with this idea of disappearing people with no due process is once that foundation is laid, if they're able to defend that lack of due process, to use that law from the 1700s, we begin a process in this country that even conservative justices of the Supreme Court said is unjustifiable. Denying people due process pushes us down a road where more exceptions can be made. You cannot deny fundamental rights to another and not endanger them for yourself. We have created a system now, if Trump is successful, where you can just say, you can just claim, you can just point to someone and say they're from X country or claim that they're part of a gang. And without any due process, without any vetting, without going before any independent arbiter, you are disappeared. Because there's just no way to challenge them. No due process for non-citizens means that we are a country in violation of those ideals I talked about from here. It says at the beginning of this country, that says very simply, no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or pursuit or property. No one without due process of law. As soon as we break that, as soon as we violate that, we're going down a road. Anton Scalia, I confess, I've disagreed with him on so many things, but this conservative justice once sat in an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They had a relationship that I think was special and shows that even people that have distinctly different views can still make real human connection in our country. They were asked by an interviewer whether undocumented people have the 5 freedoms: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition the government. Here is what the conservative Justice Scalia said. Oh, I think so. I think anybody who is present in the United States has protections under the United States Constitution. Americans abroad have that protection. Other people abroad do not. They don't have the protections of our constitutions, but anyone who is present in the United States has the protections of the United States Constitution. Anton Scalia, one of the most conservative members of the highest court in our land. And of course, Ginsburg, his ideological opposite, she concurred when she said, when we get to the 14th Amendment, it doesn't speak of citizens as some constitutions grant rights to citizens, but our Constitution says persons, and that the person is every person who was here in our country, documented or undocumented. Our Constitution is clear on the face. If you are an originalist like Anton Scalia and you read the Constitution's words, you have to stand for the idea that no one should be denied due process, that the government can't walk up to a human being and grab them off the street and put them on a plane and send them to one of the most notorious prisons in the world and just say, as one of our authority did, oopsie. Think about that. And that happened to a father of an American child. Think about that. That happened to a husband of an American woman. Think about that. That happened to a man who a judge already said he had the right to stay. When the rights of some are violated, they are a threat to the rights of all of us. In January, ICE agents in New Jersey raided a small business without a warrant and detained a Puerto Rican military veteran, a Boricua, an American citizen, detained him even after he presented his valid ID to those ICE agents. This is one example of so many. Some Americans have already been caught in Trump's immigration dragnet. More will be. An article by Nicole Foy. About a week after President Trump took office, Jonathan Guerrero was sitting at a Philadelphia car wash where he works when immigration agents burst in. The agents didn't say why they were there and didn't show their badges, Guerrero recalled. So the 21-year-old didn't get a chance to explain that although his parents were from Mexico, he was born right there in the city of brotherly love. An agent pointed his gun at Guerrero and handcuffed him. Then they brought in other car wash workers, including Guerrero's father, who's undocumented. When agents began checking IDs, they finally noticed that Guerrero's was a citizen and quickly let him go. I said, look, man, I don't know who these guys are and what they're doing. With anything law-related, I just stay quiet. Less than 2 months into the Trump administration, there has been a small but steady beat of more and more reported cases like Guerrero's. In Utah, agents pulled over and detained a 20-year-old American after he honked at them. In New Mexico, a member of the Muscalera Apache Nation, more than 2 hours from the border, was stopped and questioned by agents who demanded to see their passports. Earlier this month, a Trump voter in Virginia was pulled over and handcuffed by a gun-wielding immigration agent. It's unclear exactly how many citizens have faced the Trump administration's dragnet so far, and while previous administrations have mistakenly held Americans too, there's no firm count on these incidents either. Government doesn't release figures on citizens who have been held by immigration authorities, neither Customs and Border Protection, neither Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which handles interior immigration enforcement. Experts and advocates say what is clear to them, though, is that Trump's aggressive immigration policies, such as arrest quotas for enforcement agents, make it more and more likely that citizens will be caught up in immigration sweeps. in quotes, it's really everyone, not just non-citizens or undocumented people who are in danger of having their liberty violated in this kind of mass deportation machinery. Asked about reports of Americans getting caught up in administration's enforcement policies, an ICE spokesman told the outlet in a written statement that agents are allowed to ask for citizens' identification. Any U.S. immigration officer has authority to question without warrant any alien or person believed to be an alien concerning his or her right to be or to remain in the United States. The agency didn't respond to questions about specific cases. The U.S. has gone through spasms of detaining and even deporting large numbers of citizens. In the 1930s and 1940s, federal and local authorities forcibly exiled an estimated 1 million Mexican Americans, including hundreds of thousands of American-born children. That's our past. An estimated 1 million Mexican Americans, including hundreds of thousands of American-born children, swept up and deported. The U.S. Governmental Accountability Office report found that immigration authorities had asked to hold roughly 600 likely citizens during Trump's first term. The GAO, also the Government Accountability Office, also found that Trump actually deported about 70 likely American citizens. The GAO report did not get into any individual cases, but lawsuits brought against federal immigration agencies detailed dozens of cases where plaintiffs received a settlement. This will accelerate if there's no due process. In his first administration, there was some process. But this will accelerate if there's no due process. I live in Newark, New Jersey, and there are dozens of languages spoken in my city, and some of the elders from some of these many different ethnic groups, from European folks who don't speak English to folks from Asia that don't speak English. And imagine one of these Americans gets stopped and doesn't have papers on them, and they see a tattoo, and next thing you know, they're sent to Louisiana or Texas, and next thing you know, they're on a flight. That's not hyperbole. That's not some impossible thing. We know once due process is eliminated in this country, for some, all are in danger. It is a constitutional slippage that Scalia and conservatives who believe in the Constitution nobly object to. Canadian citizen Jasmine Mooney was detained by ICE for 2 weeks. I saw an interview of her, this white woman, stunned. Here's what she wrote. It's Canadian. There was no explanation, no warning. 1 minute, I was an immigration officer talking to an officer about my work visa, which has been approved months before and allowed me, a Canadian, to work in the United States. The next, I was told to put my hands against the wall and patted down like a criminal before being sent to an ICE detention center without the chance to talk to a lawyer. I grew up in Whitehorse, Yukon, a small town in the northernmost part of Canada. I always knew I wanted to do something bigger with my life. I left home early and moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, where I built a career spanning multiple industries, acting in film and television, owning bars and restaurants, flipping condos, and managing Airbnbs. In my 30s, I found my true passion, working in health and the wellness industry. I was given an opportunity to help launch an American brand of health tonics called Holy Water, a job that would involve moving to the United States. I was granted my trade work visa, which allows Canadian and Mexican citizens to work in the United States in specified professional occupations. I got it on my second attempt. It goes without saying then that I have no criminal record. I also love the United States and consider myself to be a kind, hardworking person. I started working in California and traveled back and forth between Canada and the US multiple times without any complications until one day, upon returning to the United States, a border officer questioned me about my initial visa denial and subsequent visa approval. He asked why I had gone to San Diego border the second time to apply. I explained that that was where my lawyer's offices were and that he had wanted to accompany me to ensure there were no issues. After a long interrogation, the officer told me that it seemed, quote, shady, and that my visa hadn't been properly processed. He claimed I couldn't work for a company in the US that made use of hemp, one of the beverage ingredients. He revoked my visa and told me I could still work for the company from Canada, but if I wanted to return to the US, I would need to apply. I was devastated. I had just started building a life in California. I stayed in California for the next few months and was eventually offered a similar position, but with a different health and wellness brand. I started the visa processes and returned to the same immigration office in San Diego at the border. Since they had processed my visa before and I was familiar with it, hours passed with many confused opinions about my case. The officer I spoke to was kind, but told me that due to my previous issues, I needed to apply for my visa through the consulate. I told her I hadn't been aware I needed to apply that way, but I had no problem doing it. Then she said something strange. You didn't do anything wrong. You were not in trouble. You were not a criminal. I remember thinking, why would she say that? Of course I'm not a criminal. Then she told me they had to send me back to Canada. That didn't concern me. I assumed I would simply book a flight home. But as I sat searching for flights, a man approached me and said, "Come with me." There was no explanation, no nothing. He took me to a room, took my belongings from my hands, and ordered me to put my hands against the wall. A woman immediately began patting me down. The commands came rapid fire, one after another, too fast to process. They took my shoes, pulled out my shoelaces. "What are you doing? What's happening?" I asked. "You are being detained." "I don't understand. What does that mean? For how long?" "I don't know." That would be the response to nearly every question I would ask over the next 2 weeks. I don't know. They brought me downstairs for a series of interviews and medical questions. They searched my bags and told me I had to get rid of half my belongings because I couldn't take everything with me. "Take everything with me where?" I asked. A woman asked me for the name of someone they could contact on my behalf. In moments like this, you realize you don't actually know anyone's phone number anymore. By some miracle, I had recently memorized my best friend Britt's number because I had been putting my grocery points on her account. I gave them her phone number. They handed me a mat and a folded up sheet of aluminum foil. "What's this?" "Your blanket." "I don't understand." I was taken to a tiny freezing cement cell with bright fluorescent lights and a toilet. There were 5 other women lying on their mats with aluminum sheets wrapped around them looking like dead bodies. The guard locked the door behind me. For 2 days, we remained in the cell, only leaving briefly for food. The lights never turned off. We never knew what time it was, and no one answered our questions. No one in the cell spoke English, so I either tried to sleep or meditate to keep from having a breakdown. I didn't trust the food, so I fasted, assuming I wouldn't be there long. On the 3rd day, I was finally allowed to make a phone call. I called Britt and told her that I didn't understand what was happening. No one would tell me when I was going home, and that she was my only contact. They gave me a stack of paperwork to sign and told me I was being given a 5-year ban unless I applied for re-entry through the consulate. The officer also said it didn't matter whether I signed the papers or not, it was happening regardless. I was so delirious, I just signed. I told them I would pay for my flight home and asked when I could leave. No answer. They then moved me to another cell, this time with no mats or blanket. I sat freezing on the cement floor for hours. That's when I realized they were processing me into real jail, the Otay Mesa Detention Center. I was told to shower, given a jail uniform, fingerprinted and interviewed. I begged for information. "How long will I be here?" "I don't know your case," the man said. "Could be days, could be weeks, but I'm telling you right now, you need to mentally prepare yourself for months." Months? I felt like I was going to throw up. I was taken to the nurse's office for a medical check. She asked what happened to me. She had never seen a Canadian there before. When I told her my story, she grabbed my hand and said, "Do you believe in God?" I told her I had only recently found God, but now I believed in God more than anything. And she said, "I believe God brought you here for a reason. I know it feels like your life is in a million pieces, but you will be okay through this. I think you're going to find a way to help others." At the time, I didn't know what that meant. She asked if she could pray for me. I held her hands and wept. I felt like I had been sent a guardian angel. I was then placed in a real jail unit. 2 levels of cells surrounding a common area, just like in the movies. I was put in a tiny cell alone with a bunk bed and a toilet. The best part, there were blankets. After 3 days without one, I wrapped myself in mine and finally felt some comfort. For the first day, I didn't leave my cell. I continued fasting, terrified that the food might make me sick. The only available water came from the tap attached to the toilet in our cells or a sink in the common area, neither of which felt safe to drink. Eventually, I forced myself to step out, meet the guards, and learn the rules. One of them told me, no fighting. I joked, I'm a lover, not a fighter. He laughed. I asked if there had been ever been a fight in there. In this unit? No, he said. No one in this unit has a criminal record. That's when I started meeting other women. That's when I started hearing their stories. And that's when I made a decision. I would never allow myself to feel sorry for my situation again. No matter how hard this was, I had to be grateful because every woman I met was in an even more difficult position than mine. There were around 140 of us in our unit. Many women had lived and worked in the U.S. legally for years, but had overstayed their visas, often after reapplying and being denied. They had all been detained without warning. If someone is a criminal, I agree they should be taken off the streets. But not one of these women had a criminal record. These women acknowledged that they shouldn't have overstayed and took responsibility for their actions, but their frustration wasn't about being held accountable. It was about the endless bureaucratic limbo they had been trapped in. The real issue was how long it took to get out of the system with no clear answers, no timeline, and no way to move forward. Once deported, many have no choice but to abandon everything they own because the cost of shipping their belongings back is too high. I met a woman who had been on a road trip with her husband. She said they had 10-year work visas. While driving near the San Diego border, they mistakenly got into a lane leading to Mexico. They stopped and told the agent they didn't have their passports on them, expecting to be redirected. Instead, they were detained. They were both pastors. I met a family of 3 who had been living in the U.S. for 11 years with work authorizations. They paid taxes and were waiting for green cards. Every year, the mother had to undergo a background check, but this time, she was told to bring her whole family. When they arrived, they were taken into custody and told their status would now be processed from within the detention center. Another woman from Canada had been living in the U.S. with her husband, who was detained after a traffic stop. She admitted she had overstayed her visa and accepted that she would be deported, but she had been stuck in the system for almost 6 weeks because she had her passport. Who runs casual errands without their passport? One woman had a 10-year visa. When it expired, she moved back to her home country, Venezuela. She admitted she had overstayed by 1 month before leaving. Later, she returned from a vacation and entered the U.S. without issue. But when she took a domestic flight from Miami to Los Angeles, she was picked up by ICE and detained. She couldn't be deported because Venezuela wasn't accepting deportees. She didn't know where she was getting out. She didn't know when she was getting out. There was a girl from India who had overstayed her student visa for 3 days before heading back home. She then came back to the U.S. on a new visa to finish her master's degree and was handed over to ICE due to the 3 days she had overstayed on her previous visa. There were women who had been picked up off the streets from outside their workplaces, from their homes. All of these women told me that they had been detained from time spans ranging from a few weeks to 10 months. One woman's daughter was outside the detention center protesting for her release. That night, the pastor invited me into a service she was holding. A girl who spoke English translated for me as the woman took turns sharing their prayers for their sick parents, for their children they hadn't seen in weeks, for the loved ones that they had been torn away from. Then unexpectedly, they asked if they could pray for me. I was new here, and they wanted to welcome me. They formed a prayer circle around me, took my hands and prayed. I had never felt so much love, energy, and compassion from a group of strangers in my life. Everyone was crying. At 3 a.m. the next day, I was woken up in my cell. Pack your bag, you're leaving. I jolted upright. I get to go home? The operative shrugged. I don't know where you're going. Of course, no one knew anything. I grabbed my things and went downstairs, where 10 other women stood in silence, tears streaming down their faces, but these weren't happy tears. That was the moment I learned the term transferred. For many of these women, detention centers had become a twisted version of home. They had formed bonds, established routines, and found slivers of comfort in friendships they had built. Now, without warning, they were being torn apart and sent somewhere new. Watching them say goodbye, clinging to each other, was gut-wrenching. I had no idea what was waiting for me next. In hindsight, that was probably for the best. Our next stop was Arizona, the San Luis Regional Detention Center. The transfer process had lasted for 24 hours, a sleepless, grueling ordeal. This time, men were transported with us, roughly 50 of us crammed into a prison bus for the next 5 hours, packed together, women in the front, men in the back. We were bound in chains that wrapped tightly around our waists, with our cuffed hands secured to our bodies and shackles restraining our feet, forcing every moment into a slow, clinking struggle. When we arrived at our next destination, we were forced to go through the entire intake process all over again with medical exams, fingerprinting, and pregnancy tests. They linked us up in a filthy cell, squatting over a communal toilet, holding Dixie cups of urine while the nurses dropped pregnancy tests in each of our cups. It was disgusting. We sat in freezing cold jail cells for hours, waiting for everyone to be processed. Across the room, one of the women suddenly spotted her husband. They had both been detained and were now seeing each other for the first time in weeks. The look in their faces, pure love, relief, and longing, was something I'll never forget. We were beyond exhausted. I felt like I was hallucinating. The guard tossed us each a blanket and said, "Find a bed." There were no pillows. The room was cold as ice, and one blanket wasn't enough. Around me, women lay curled into themselves, heads covered, looking like a room full of corpses. This place made the last jail feel like the Four Seasons. I kept telling myself, do not let this break you. 30 of us shared one room. We were given one styrofoam cup for water and one plastic spoon that we had to reuse for every meal. I eventually had to start trying to eat. Sure enough, I got sick. None of the uniforms fit, and everyone had men's shoes on. The towels they gave us to shower with were hand towels. They wouldn't give us more blankets. The fluorescent lights shined on us 24/7. Everything felt like it was meant to break you. Nothing was explained to us. I wasn't given a phone call. We were locked in a room, no daylight, with no idea when we would get out. I tried to stay calm as every fiber of my being raged toward panic mode. I didn't know how I would tell Britt where I was. Then, as if sent from God, one of the women showed me a tablet attached to the wall where I could send emails. I only remembered my CEO's email from memory. I typed out a message praying he would see it. He responded. Through him, I was able to connect with Britt. She told me that they were working around the clock trying to get me out, but no one had any answers. The system made it next to impossible. I told her about the conditions in this new place, and that was when we decided to go to the media. She started working with a reporter and asked whether I would be able to call her so she could loop him in. The international phone account that Britt had previously tried to set up for me wasn't working, so one of the other women offered to let me use her phone account to make a call. In that cell, we were all in this together. With nothing to do in my cell but talk, I made new friends. Women had risked everything for their chance at a better life for themselves and their families. Through them, I learned the harsh reality of seeking asylum. Showing me their physical scars, they explained how they had paid smugglers anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 to reach the U.S. border, enduring brutal jungles and horrendous conditions. One woman had been offered asylum in Mexico within 2 weeks, but had been encouraged to keep going to the U.S. Now she was stuck, living in a nightmare, separated from her young children for months. She sobbed, telling me how she felt like the worst mother in the world. Many of these women were highly educated and spoke multiple languages. If they had been advised to pretend they didn't speak English because it would supposedly increase their chances of asylum. Some believed they were being used as examples, as warnings to others not to come. Women were starting to panic in this new facility, and knowing I was most likely the first person to get out, they wrote letters and messages for me to send to their families. I felt like we all had been kidnapped, thrown in some sort of sick psychological experiment meant to strip us of every ounce of our strength and dignity. We were from different countries, spoke different languages, and practiced different religions, yet in this place, None of that mattered. Everyone took care of each other. Everyone shared food. Everyone held each other when someone broke down. Everyone fought to keep each other's hope alive. I got a message from Brit. My story had started to blow up in the media almost immediately after I was told I was being released. My ICE agent, who had never spoken before, told my lawyer I could have left sooner if I had signed a withdrawal form and that they hadn't known I would pay for my own flight home. From the moment I arrived, I begged every officer I saw to let me pay for my own ticket home. Not a single one of them ever spoke to me about my case. To put things into perspective, I had a Canadian passport, lawyers, resources, media attention, friends, family, and even politicians advocating for me, yet I was still detained for nearly 2 weeks. Imagine what this system is like for every other person in there. A small group of us were transferred back to San Diego at 2 a.m. One last road trip, once again shackled in chains. I was then taken to the airport where 2 officers were waiting for me. The media was there, so the officers snuck me through a side door, trying to avoid anyone seeing me in my restraints. I was beyond grateful that at the very least I didn't have to walk through the airport in chains. To my surprise, the officers escorting me were incredibly kind and even funny. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. I asked if I could put my shoelaces back on. Yes, one of them said with a grin, but you better not run. Yeah, the other one added, or we'll have to tackle you in the airport. That'll really make headlines. I laughed and then told them I spent a lot of time observing the guards during my detention, and I couldn't believe how often I saw humans treating other humans with such disregard. But don't worry, I joked. You two get 5 stars. When I finally landed in Canada, my mom and 2 best friends were waiting for me. So was the media. I spoke to them briefly, numb and delusional from exhaustion. It was surreal listening to my friends recount everything they had done to get me out, working with lawyers, reaching out to the media, making endless calls to detention centers, desperately trying to get through to ICE or anyone who could help. They said the entire system felt rigged, designed to make it nearly impossible for anyone to get out. The reality became clear. ICE detention isn't just a bureaucratic nightmare, it's a business. These facilities are privately owned and run for profit. Companies like Core Civic and Geo Group receive government funding based on the number of people they detain, which is why they lobby for stricter immigration policies. It's a lucrative business. Core Civic made over $560 million from ICE contracts in a single year. In 2024, Geo Group more than $763 million from ICE contracts. The more detainees, the more money they make. It stands to reason that these companies have no incentive to release people quickly. What I had experienced was finally starting to make sense. This is not just my story. It is a story of thousands and thousands of people still strapped in a system that profits from their suffering. I am writing in hopes that someone out there, someone with power to change any of this, can help do something. The strength I witnessed in those women, the love they gave despite their suffering, is what gives me faith. Faith that no matter how flawed the system is, how cruel the circumstances, humanity will always shine through. Even in the darkest places, within the most broken systems, humanity persists. Sometimes it reveals itself in the smallest unexpected acts of kindness, a shared meal, a whispered prayer, a hand reaching out in the dark. We are defined by the love we extend. We are defined by the love we extend. We are defined by the love we extend. We are defined by the love we extend, by the courage we summon, and the truths we are willing to tell. It's the end of the article. The stories continue. A 10-year-old citizen in Texas, recovering from brain cancer, was detained at a Border Patrol checkpoint, and eventually the American citizen was deported to Mexico with her undocumented parents, even though they were in need of medical attention for their brain cancer. Here's the article from NBC. U.S. citizen child recovering from brain cancer removed to Mexico with undocumented parents. A family that was deported to Mexico hopes they can find a way to return to the U.S. and ensure their 10-year-old daughter, my fellow American, who is a U.S. citizen, can continue her brain cancer treatment. Immigration authorities removed the girl and 4 of her American siblings from Texas on May 4th. 5 Americans in total. When they deported their undocumented parents, the family's ordeal last month when they were rushing from the Rio Grande City where they live to Houston, where their daughter's specialist doctors are based for emergency medical checkup. The parents had done the trip at least 5 other times in the past, passing through an immigration checkpoint every time without any issues, according to attorney Danny Woodward from Texas Civil Rights Project, a legal advocacy and litigation organization representing the family. In previous occasions, the parents showed letters from their doctors and lawyers to the officers at the checkpoint to get through, but in early February, the letters weren't enough. They were stopped at the checkpoint. They were arrested after the parents were unable to show legal immigration documentation. The mother, who spoke exclusively to NBC News, said she tried to explain her daughter's circumstances to the officers, but they weren't interested in hearing that. Other than lacking valid immigration status in the U.S., the parents have no criminal history, Woodward said. Protection, which detained and deported the family, according to the lawyer, said in an email Wednesday, for privacy reasons, we do not comment on individual cases. On Thursday, a CBP spokesperson said via email that the reports of the family's situation are inaccurate because when someone is given expelled removal orders and chooses to disregard them, they will face the consequences of the process. They reiterated that they couldn't speak about the specifics of the case for privacy reasons. The 10-year-old girl was diagnosed with brain cancer last year and underwent surgery to remove a tumor. The doctors practically gave me no hope for life for her, but thank God she's a miracle, the mother said. An American citizen is a miracle. The swelling on the girl's brain is still not fully gone, the mother said, causing difficulties with speech and mobility of the right side of her body. Before the family was removed from the U.S., the girl was routinely checked in with doctors monitoring her recovery, attending rehabilitation therapies, and taking medication to prevent convulsions. It's a very difficult thing, the mother said. I don't wish anyone to go through this situation. What is happening to this family is an absolute tragedy and is something that is not isolated to just them, said Rochelle Garcia, president of the Texas Civil Rights Project. This is part of a pattern and practice that we've seen in the Trump administration, Garza said, adding that she has heard of multiple other cases concerning mixed status families. But for now, this is the only case of this nature the organization has taken on. The Trump administration's border czar, Tom Homan, has said families can be deported together regardless of status. Homan said it would be up to the parents to decide whether to depart the U.S. together or leave their children behind. But undocumented parents of U.S.-born children, if picked up by immigration authorities, face the risk of losing custody of their children without the power of attorney, document, or a guardianship outlining who will take care of their children left behind. The children go into the U.S. foster care system, making it harder for the parents to regain custody of their children in the future. According to the girl's mother, she recalled feeling like she could not do anything. She said in Spanish, "You're between a rock and a hard place." NBC News is withholding the name of the mother and the rest of the family members since they were deported to an area in Mexico that is known for kidnapping U.S. citizens. In addition to the parents and their 10-year-old sick American daughter, 4 of their other American children, ages 15, 13, 8, and 6, were also in the car when they were detained. 4 of the 5 children born in the U.S. According to the mother, the family was taken to a detention center following their arrest, where their mom and daughters were separated from her husband and sons, and she realized she wouldn't be taking her daughter to the doctors. The fear is horrible. I can't explain it, but it's something frustrating, very tough, something you wouldn't wish on anyone. She said, adding that her sick daughter was laying on a cold floor beneath incandescent lights. Hours later, the family was placed in a van and dropped on the Mexico side of the Texas bridge. From there, they sought refuge in a nearby shelter for a week. Mom said the safety concerns keep coming up at night, and the children haven't been able to go to school. The 10-year-old daughter and 15-year-old son, who lives with a heart disorder known as long QT syndrome, which causes irregular heartbeats and can be life-threatening if not treated well, have not received the health care they need in Mexico. The teen wears a monitor that tracks his heart rate. The authorities have my children's lives in the hands, she said in tears. The authorities have my children's lives in their hands. Both parents arrived to the U.S. from Mexico in 2013 and settled in Texas, hoping for a better life for their family, the mother said. She and her husband both worked for a string of different jobs to support their 6 children. The couple also has a 17-year-old son that they left behind in Texas following their deportation. Just 2 weeks ago, another undocumented mother in California, caring for her 20-year-old daughter, a U.S. citizen undergoing treatment for bone cancer, was detained by immigration authorities and later released under humanitarian parole. We are calling on the government, Garza said, to parole the family, to correct the harm, and to not do this to anyone else.
Gentleman yield.
I think I need to. I'll yield to a question. I'll yield to a question while retaining the floor, and I thank my brother, I thank my friend, who's now stood with me for almost 11 hours.
Those are hard stories to read, Senator Booker, but I appreciate you showing the coldness of this current administration's immigration policy. You know, the tragedy to me is that there's an opportunity to fix what is undoubtedly a broken immigration system. And yet we're into day 71 and Donald Trump has not proposed to us any proposals to fix the broken system. Instead, what he is doing is spending like a drunken sailor on an enforcement system that wastes tens of millions of taxpayer dollars. You described this harrowing experience that this Canadian woman had. And as I was listening to this 2-week ordeal that she went through, being transported from site to site, being processed and reprocessed, as the top Democrat on the Homeland Security Subcommittee of Appropriations, I'm just cataloging in my brain how much money that cost us. Ultimately, this was somebody working in the United States. This was somebody that posed no threat to United States citizens. But we probably spent several $1 million on that 2-week ordeal. Overall, the Trump administration is going to blow through all of the money allocated to Border Patrol. They are going to have to come back to Congress for a massive additional appropriation, all at the same time that they are shuttering medical research in this country. They are closing down Social Security offices. There are measles outbreaks all across the country. Planes seem to be falling out of the sky as the FAA is enduring layoffs. There are consequences to these spending decisions. The amount of money that's being spent at the border, much of it wasted in a showy, ineffective response. The consequence of that is that the services that average everyday Americans need, like help on their Social Security claims, are being impacted. But we need to fix the broken immigration system. And we had an opportunity to do that last year when Republicans and Democrats came together and wrote a bipartisan border security bill that frankly would have allocated tens of billions of additional dollars, that would have fixed our broken asylum system, would have given the president new authorities. And Donald Trump instructed all the Republicans in this chamber to oppose it. In the end, I think 4 senators, including the author, Senator Langford, supported it, but every other Republican here opposed it. And the reason Donald Trump told them to oppose it was that he would fix it when he became president. But we are now in day 72, and there has not been a single proposal from Donald Trump to fix the broken immigration system. Just a whole bunch of spending, essentially money down the drain, because the system itself needs to be reformed. And so it speaks to, my confident belief that Donald Trump does not want to fix our immigration system. He wants to keep this issue open as a sore in our politics. If I was wrong, he would have proposed legislation here to deal with the underlying inefficiency of the system instead of just throwing money at the problem. And so we will see what the result of this campaign is. We were told that immigrants to this country represented a very specific national security threat, that we needed to crack down on immigration, including expelling from this country legitimate asylum seekers, because that was what was necessary to protect the nation. Well, we'll see what the crime data tells us for the first few months of this administration. I have a feeling I already know what the story is. Crime is not going to have gone down. Why? Because, in fact, whether people want to acknowledge this or not, natural-born American citizens commit crimes at rates higher than first-generation immigrants or people born outside of the United States of America. But Senator Booker, I guess the question I want to ask you is this. I think you and I agree that Americans, right, left, and center, acknowledge that the immigration system is broken. I mean, they didn't love it when they saw thousands of people crossing on an average day. And they know that when it takes 10 years to process an asylum claim, something's wrong, and that it then just provides an incentive for people to come here without documentation. But my impression is that that cross-section of Americans that believes that the existing immigration system is broken also believes 3 other things. One, that the way to fix it is to change the laws, and that they believe that we have not done our job until we have changed the laws. For instance, building a better asylum system. And once again, not a single proposal from the Trump administration on how to fix our broken immigration system. Not a single proposal. Second, I believe that they understand that immigration is a core strength of this nation, not a liability. And that if we want to thrive as an economy, we are going to have to bring people to this country legally. But to turn our backs on immigration as a mechanism to grow economically, that's not in line with what Americans believe, even those that think the existing system is broken. And then lastly, I just don't believe this country is as mean as Donald Trump thinks it is. Like, I get it that everybody wants this nation to be a nation of laws, but when an American citizen looks at a child with a medical condition, when an American citizen looks at an individual who will face certain death from a drug gang if they stay in their home country, when they look at individuals in war-torn nations overseas, they believe that America is strong enough, is big enough, is generous enough to be able to protect those people from harm. Why? Because that's what America always has been. And so this idea that President Trump has that Americans are mean and spiteful and don't want to help people just because they were born outside of the United States or their parents were born outside of the United States, I just don't think that's right. It obviously betrays the best traditions of this nation, but I think it also fundamentally misreads the American people. So I think people want our immigration to be fixed, system to be fixed, but I think they want us to do it. They understand the laws are broken. They do not want to abandon America's tradition of bringing people here from all around the world. They understand that our economy and our economic prosperity is linked to our ability to bring hardworking immigrants to this country, and they're just not as mean as Donald Trump thinks they are.
Senator, I appreciate your question, but I just have to say this to you. You worked so hard with Senator Lankford. And one of the things I have to say, and I hope I don't hurt his politics by telling people how much I love Senator Lankford, we disagree fundamentally on a lot of issues. Maybe that will help him. We both are people, though, of faith. We just recently were together at a massive, I think there must have been like 1,000 people there, maybe 500 at least, at a national prayer breakfast event. He's such a man of character. And what I like about him is I know his values because he every day tries to be a good Christian. And this idea of love thy neighbor, or you were a stranger in a strange land, I just kind of took a lot of pleasure watching you, my friend, who I know for the last 12 years, and him sit down in this honest, sincere negotiation. And let's be real, everybody on your side of the aisle didn't agree with you. And everybody before Trump's involvement on his side of the aisle didn't agree, but you guys had the makings of a comprehensive bill that would have passed. Now, I'll tell you also that I came here in 2013 right after a Gang of 8 had done the same thing. They actually got the bill out and it died in the House. There are people in America, despite Lankford and you, who many people would put on opposite sides of a political spectrum, that on these issues they agree. And why do they agree, Senator Murphy? Why? Because our economy is dependent upon immigration. You want to talk about a conservative-leaning group, center moderate Republicans, the Chamber of Commerce will tell you, the National Chamber of Commerce will tell you, our economy will be crippled if we don't find a way to bring more people in legally to work on work visas. When I go to the tech community, or the biotech community, or the AI community, or the community is trying to go forward in quantum computing, all of them are saying this is crazy that we are not allowing the brightest minds on the planet, when they get here and get PhDs in half of Congress can't spell, that we kick them out of the country. There are so many points of agreement, like take Dreamers, who people on both sides of the aisle have held up as a group of people that are Americans in every way except for the piece of paper. They have no memory of another country. I could keep going through all the things in the immigration world we agree on, including the need to secure our southern border. And so I listen to you on this section, and I look at you, and I remember your frustrations. You're standing up in front of our caucus saying, we're so close.
Senator, yield.
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I just want to drill down on this for a moment, because it gets back to a theme that you have been hitting on throughout the evening and early morning. And that is, not everything has to be zero-sum politics, right? I mean, this is part of what is so exhausting about the last 71 days. for many, many Americans. I think it's part of why Donald Trump's approval ratings are sinking by the day, because, listen, you and I are pugilists when we need to be, right? I mean, we fight when we think that there's a worthy fight. That's what this is today. It's a fight. We understand it's a fight for our values. But we don't think everything has to be a fight. We see our jobs as standing up for our convictions, but then finding that common ground. I did not expect to be in that room with Senator Lankford. I was surprised pleasantly when we came to an agreement. You spent months and months hammering out really difficult criminal justice reform with a colleague of yours that you have equal numbers of disagreements with, because we feel like we have a call from our constituents to fight, but then find the common ground. But this administration has zero interest in common ground. Every single day, they wake up thinking only about conflict, thinking only about defeat of their opposition. And they have been frustrated because they've been trying to do a lot of illegal things, and the courts have been telling them no. They're now talking about extraordinary measures like impeaching judges or defunding the courts. Instead, they could reach out to Democrats. They could decide to do what every previous president has tried to do, which is, instead of ramming through a one-side-only policy on immigration, for instance, come to people of goodwill on the opposing party and try to work out a compromise. This is what exhausts the American people, is this administration's complete, total unwillingness to find common ground on anything. That is not where the center of this country is. And on the issue of immigration, we found common ground last year. It was hard. It did not satisfy everyone. But we have proven that on this issue, that is hot, that is difficult for even family members to talk about sometimes, that even on this issue of immigration, we can find that common ground. And so we are here, you are here, because there's a fight to be waged. But I think we both wish, on a litany of these topics, we were instead sitting down with our colleagues. But that is just not in the DNA of this administration. And that is part of why this president is becoming more and more unpopular by the day, is because they expect any president, to make at least a minimalist effort to try to reach out and find compromise. And that never happens from the Trump administration.
For the question I see in there, and I again, great presidents have great ideas they bring to Congress, and they fight to pull together and cobble together legislation that will last. The problem we have right now is this whiplash between Trump's executive orders and Biden's executive orders and Trump's executive orders, and it's not solving the problems. And you've shown that there's enough common ground to do something on them. But I don't want to stick with common ground now, actually, because there's some things in here that are not common ground, like private prisons. You know, I'm one of these folks that doesn't want to criticize. I've flown out to a private prison down south to get a tour, met really kind and nice people, but there is something problematic to me about a profit motive for imprisoning, shackling, detaining, and holding people. And this combination of that and a corporate reality where you are giving campaign contributions to people that will then turn around and give you government contracts to restrict the liberties of human beings. And the story that I read about this woman feeling like They lied to her lawyer and said if she had only said she could pay for her own flight home, but they were keeping her, and every day they were keeping her, they were getting more money from American taxpayers. This wasn't a system designed for justice. This isn't a system that's designed for the rights of human beings in our country. This is a system that has every day an incentive to deny the liberty, to hold people It's wrong. It's wrong. It's broken. And with a president that doesn't care about these things, that is giving greater latitude so that more stories like the Canadian woman's story, it's stunning. I want to keep moving, though. And I just want to talk about children and the way this system is extended to children. Last week, the government canceled a contract to provide legal services to 26,000 unaccompanied immigrant children. Remember what Anton Scalia said about due process in his strict interpretations of the literal writings of our founders. But 26,000 unaccompanied migrant children no longer have legal representation. We started on that idea.